He sat quietly on the corner bench, wrapped in an old coat with a torn backpack by his feet. Most people didn't even glance at him. Some crossed the street to avoid him. Others rolled their eyes or whispered as they walked past. To the world, he was just another homeless man, another face in the crowd, forgotten and invisible. But what they didn't know was that he carried something in his pocket that could change everything. That morning had started like any other. He had asked for spare change, received cold stares, and waited in line at a cafe hoping someone might offer him a warm drink. But no one did. Even when he tried to thank a woman for holding the door open, she looked through him like he didn't exist. Until something happened. Out of nowhere, he reached into his coat, pulled out a folded piece of old cloth, and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a crisp, rare backslashed $10,000 bill. Not a fake, not a trick. A real piece of currency, shocking in its silence. A few people caught sight of it, and everything changed. The man who had just been ignored, judged, and avoided suddenly became the center of attention. Whispers turned into stares. People came closer. But the question remained, who was he really? And why would someone with that kind of money be living on the streets? What happened next revealed a truth no one saw coming, and it left the whole town talking. Before the crowd gathered, before the whispers turned into questions, his days were spent in silence. His name was Martin, though no one ever asked. He had shown up in that neighborhood about a month ago, always quiet, never causing trouble. People just assumed he was like everyone else on the street, down on luck, forgotten, maybe battling something unseen. But Martin was different. Every morning, he sat in the same spot near the bakery, sketching in a little notebook no one ever looked at. He didn't beg loudly, didn't shout. He just watched people. And people in return looked right past him. But the day he pulled out the backslash $10,000 bill, everything people thought they knew unraveled. A man who'd brushed him off minutes earlier came back, asking if he was all right. A woman offered him coffee, smiling nervously. For the first time, Martin spoke. "Funny how paper changes everything," he said quietly. His voice was calm, almost too calm. The cafe owner, who had refused to let him use the restroom the day before, now invited him in. But Martin hesitated. He knew what this sudden kindness was about. It wasn't him. It was the bill. No one had asked where he got it, or why he had it, or even if he was safe. They just saw money and assumed he mattered now. The real mystery wasn't the money. It was Martin. Where had he come from? Why was he here? And why was he carrying something so valuable without anyone knowing? Martin sat inside the cafe now, sipping tea he hadn't asked for. People kept glancing over, some pretending not to stare. The staff, once cold and dismissive, was suddenly too friendly. A young man from the neighborhood, Josh, watched from a nearby table. He'd seen Martin almost every day on that same bench and never paid much attention. But now curiosity pulled at him. Why would a homeless man carry a backslash $10,000 bill? Was it fake? Was he hiding something? Across town, rumors spread fast. Some said Martin was an undercover millionaire testing how people treated the poor. Others whispered he was a con artist, using a rare collector's bill to get sympathy. A local blogger even showed up at the cafe, snapping photos from outside. Everyone had a theory, but no one had the truth. Josh decided to talk to Martin. He slid into the seat across from him, unsure how to start. "Hey, I've seen you around. Just wanted to say, that was a bold move back there," he said awkwardly. Martin looked up and smiled faintly. "It wasn't a move," he replied. "It was a reminder." Josh noticed the notebook again, edges worn, cover nearly falling apart. "What's in there?" he asked. Martin paused, tapping it lightly. "Stories," he said. "Pieces of people no one notices, including me." Outside, more people gathered, eager to see the man with the money. But Martin's mind was elsewhere. He knew attention was dangerous, and soon someone from his past would come looking. Josh couldn't stop thinking about Martin's words. Reminder asterisk, but of what? The money, the silence, the notebook full of hidden stories. It all hinted at something bigger. Martin clearly wasn't just another man down on his luck. There was weight behind his eyes, like he'd lived through something most people couldn't imagine. Josh wanted to ask more, but before he could, two men in suits walked into the cafe. They scanned the room and locked eyes on Martin. Something shifted in Martin's face, not fear, but something close. He slowly closed his notebook and stood up before they could approach. The taller man flashed a badge, not police, but something corporate. He whispered something to Martin, and the tone instantly pulled the attention of everyone around. Josh could only make out a few words. "You disappeared. We thought you were dead." Martin didn't respond. He looked at Josh, gave him a slight nod, and said, "Sometimes it's easier to vanish than to watch everything fall apart." Whispers rippled through the cafe. The staff exchanged nervous glances. Someone pulled out their phone to start recording. It was clear now. Martin wasn't who they thought he was. The $10,000 bill wasn't random. It was a clue, but the question still hung heavy in the air. What was Martin running from? One of the men leaned in and said something no one else could hear. Whatever it was made Martin clench his jaw. The calm he carried all day was starting to crack, and what came next would change everything. Martin's eyes darkened after hearing the man's whisper. He looked at both suited strangers for a long moment, then slowly sat back down. The cafe had gone quiet, all eyes on him, waiting. Josh leaned in, whispering, "Who are these guys?" Martin didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened his notebook to a page marked with a torn receipt and slid it toward Josh. There, drawn with incredible detail, was a sketch of a building, burned at the top, windows shattered. Underneath it, in careful handwriting, were the words, asterisk. They said it was an accident. I know it wasn't asterisk. Before Josh could ask, Martin spoke softly but firmly. That bill, it came from a vault that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. One of the men took a step closer, clearly trying to stop him from saying more. That fired of everything, Martin continued, voice tightening. My team, my name, my past. They wanted me gone. Josh stared at him, the pieces slowly clicking together. Martin wasn't just homeless, he was hiding. Hiding from a corporation, or something bigger, that wanted him silenced. The men weren't here to help. They were here to erase what was left of his story. The cafe door suddenly burst open again. A woman, breathless and determined, pushed past the crowd. She locked eyes with Martin. You're not going with them, she said. Not again. Gasps broke out. Josh looked between them, stunned. Whoever she wasn't just part of his past. She might be the one person who could expose the truth. Martin stood up slowly, his voice calm but louder now. I told you I wouldn't disappear again, he said, facing the two men. The woman moved beside him, gripping his arm gently. I have everything, she added, pulling a flash drive from her coat pocket. The files they buried, the real cause of the fire, the names they tried to erase, including his. Gasps spread through the cafe again. The taller man's face paled. You don't want to do this, he muttered, clearly shaken. But Martin didn't back down. He looked around the room, at the people who once ignored him, now witnessing a truth too big to stay hidden. Josh grabbed his phone and hit record. People need to hear this, he said. All of it. Martin nodded. The bill was never about money, he said, his voice steady. It was a marker. One of the last things I saved before the fire. Proof that something existed, that I existed. The suited men started backing toward the door, but it was too late. Police sirens echoed in the distance. Someone had already called them, probably when the woman showed up. The two vanished into the crowd just as officers pulled in. As Martin sat back down, letting the weight of it all settle, Josh leaned in. So what now? Martin smiled faintly. Now, I stop hiding. But just as things seemed to find peace, he opened his notebook one last time. Inside was a fresh sketch of Josh, and underneath it, Asterisk, he knows too much now, asterisk. Josh stared at the sketch in Martin's notebook, stunned. Is that supposed to be a warning? He asked, half joking, half nervous. Martin chuckled softly. No, he said. It means you're part of the story now. The notebook had always been more than drawings. It was Martin's way of remembering people who saw him, even when the world didn't. And now Josh had earned his place. The police took statements, and the woman, whose name was Elena, handed over the flash drive. She had been Martin's partner in the past, back when they both worked in research for a private firm. When the fire destroyed the lab, the company buried the truth to protect itself. Martin had survived, but instead of going public, he disappeared, waiting for the right moment. That moment had finally come. The media caught wind of the story within hours. Homeless man exposes corporate cover-up trended online. But Martin didn't stick around for fame or credit. He quietly left the city a few days later, notebook still in hand, moving on like he always had. Josh, now with a viral story on his hands, shared what he'd learned. Never judge someone by how they look, and never underestimate quiet strength. He started a small blog, writing about overlooked lives and hidden truths. Martin's story was just the first. Some say Martin still walks from town to town, sketching, watching, listening. But one thing's certain, he left behind more than a mystery. He left a lesson. Sometimes, the ones we ignore are the ones holding the truth.